educational testing is something that I would like you all to understand, so that when you're looking at your child, you're not making rash decisions, you're not jumping to conclusions, and you're trying to find out logically. Because if our first chapter is all about brain development, understanding where your child fits in a learning process is very important. So without further ado, Dr. Susan Maynard.
I have been living in Miami probably 29 years, and in that time I've had a private practice, and I have worked with men, women, couples, and children and their families. And I like having an eclectic practice. I think it keeps me sharper. I get used to doing interesting things. I remember when Southeast Bank went in, I worked with 3 of the executives there. How they ever got my name, I don't have the slightest idea. But it was wonderful to talk with men and about business and do things like that. So one part of my practice is doing therapy. Before I get into this, I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. I have lived here 30 years. I won't go move that so I don't trip over it. I started out being a psychologist in Ipswich, Massachusetts, where I was the school psychologist there. And I had to take care of a high school, a junior high, and 5 elementary schools. And I was the bottom line. I could refer out, of course, but if someone was going to do something rash, I got a call. And it was what I call learning very, very quickly, because you had no one else to turn to but yourself, so you learned to handle the things as they came along. Excuse me. So what I do, as I said, I work partly with adults and partly with children. I would say most of my clients are parents and working with the issues of parenting and how to parent and why are their children having problems in school. And so the other part of my job then is doing testing. I really love it. I quit doing it. I could have retired probably a number of years ago. Some people think I should have, like my husband, but that's another issue. But you learn so much about a child, and it's fascinating. They say, don't you get bored doing it over and over, seeing the same thing? Everyone learns differently, and you get to see how people's minds work, and it really is quite fascinating. I'm going to tell you some of the negative things about testing also, as well as positive. I won't even get into the FCAT because that would last me a half an hour. So we will just skip that, and you can tell what I think of that right away. Excuse me. But what I do is a complete psychoeducational battery of testing. It includes 4 different parts. It includes an IQ test, which takes me about an hour and a half to do. It includes achievement testing, which I do in using special tests, and I'm going to show you all these tests in a minute, to find out just what grade level the child is working at in writing, reading, word attack skills, phonics, math, and I do them both orally and auditorily. And maybe I should talk a little bit about that. All of us learn in different ways. But it can be divided sort of into 2 categories. Some of us are auditory learners and some of us are visual learners. I have a little Maynard theory that is that people marry each other because one is auditory and one is visual. I am a visual learner. If you introduce yourself to me, 3 days from now, I will not know your name, but I will probably remember what you wore. Now, I live with a man who used to play the bassoon. I wish he still did, but he doesn't. He is totally auditory, and I swear I'm not exaggerating too much. He could come into our room, and I could take all the furniture out of downstairs, and he'd come home and say, "Hi, honey." And a couple of days later, he might look at me and say, "Is there something different here?" He is someone who is truly an auditory learner, and that's the way he learns. If we know how people, excuse me, if we know how people learn, we can help them, A, help themselves, B, have teachers help them and teach them in the right way, and get them in the correct educational environment. And also have parents accept what their children are like. And I'm going to go into a little bit about what happens when people get asked to come to have a whole complete battery of testing. But first I'll finish going through just what I do as a complete battery of testing. First of all is an IQ test. there are now 4 different IQ tests. There's a WIPSI, which is for preschool and children who are 2 to 3 years old. There's one for 4-year-olds to 7-year-olds. Then there is an IQ test called the WISC Intelligence Scale for Children, 4th edition. It tests children from 6 years old to 16, 11. So there's some times when you can pick the WISC or you can pick the WISC. I did, as a matter of fact, as sort of an experiment. I had a wonderful parent come to me and I said, would you mind if I gave your child both these tests at different times and over a sort of 6-month period to see if there was any difference, if I gave them the WIPSI if they were 7 or if I gave them the Wechsler. And they scored almost alike. So it's still an individual choice for me when I see a child to decide which one of those lower tests I would give. I will get into talking a little about what I think is going on that is wrong about doing some of the testing of younger children in a bit. But basically, I'm going to pass these around. I ask that everything you pass around, you please get back to me. Because A, it's unethical for you to have these tests that you're not trained to use, and B, I'm going to show you a lot of student work that I have obtained when I've been testing, and I want that back too, because it obviously, for confidentiality. They're very old, so I don't think there's any way anyone would know who they are, but still it's something that I want back so I can put back in the files for a certain amount of time. The Wechsler test has about 14 different subtests. They consist of something called block design. You put the blocks together. Similarities, which is one of the more intellectual parts of the test, it has you classify things. How is a fork and a knife alike? And it gets very esoteric at the end. It's very difficult. Digit span, you repeat numbers backwards and forwards to me that I give you randomly. Picture concepts is another classifying type of test. There are pictures here and here and here, and you have to tell what is the common thread between 3 of the pictures. And that, again, gets very difficult as you go on. Coding, I'm going to show you that in a minute. And symbol search are both 2 written type tests that they have to do. Arithmetic is self-explanatory. Matrix reasoning is a designs where you have to pick out the piece that will fit in the design that is pictured for you. I would have logged all these tests here, but I just didn't see myself going up and down the stairs with about 14, because the testing materials I have are very weighty and large. Comprehension is not comprehension, it's common sense reasoning. And one of the things that's interesting to me about testing, in common sense reasoning, there are questions asked such as, what would you do if you saw smoke coming from a neighbor's house? What would you do if you saw a purse in a store that didn't belong to you? What would you do if a child much smaller than you hit you? The answers I get to those questions immediately put something in my head about, if the child said he's going to smack the child who's much younger than them, I'm going to say, that's interesting. Or if they don't know what to do if there's smoke in the house next door. What I find a lot lately is that children are being protected so much that many of them who are very bright score very low on this particular test because they're not exposed to a lot of things. And it's an immediate cue to me to tell them, take your child to the grocery store, take your child other places, and try not to protect them so much. Anyway, it's a very well-designed test, and it does give you a lot of information. There are a lot of tests I do not have to give, but I give them anyway because I think the more information I get, the better I am able to judge the child. Picture completion is simply looking at a picture, telling me what's missing. If a child can't do that, they're going to be terrible proofreaders. It might be a good excuse to be able to say to their parents, why don't you check over that work? Don't do their homework and stay out of their business most of the time they're doing homework. But that might be a child who really can't proofread.